The storm outside had swallowed the sun hours earlier, leaving the library in a hush so deep it seemed carved from stone. Behind the front desk, Eleanor Wren, head librarian for 27 quiet years, sorted the last of the day's returns. Her hands moved with the unconscious precision of habit, yet her mind lingered on the oddity that had arrived that morning, a small brown paper parcel with no sender's name, no return address, and handwriting so faint it seemed ashamed of itself. The package lay unopened beside her tea, whispering for attention. At last, with the lamps casting gold over dust-flecked air, Eleanor slipped a finger under the tape. The paper peeled away like brittle skin, revealing an object that stopped her breath. A manuscript bound in cracking leather, its cover etched with symbols she could not place. Not hieroglyphs, not quite. The ink shimmered faintly in the lamplight, as if it had been laid down yesterday, not centuries ago. She turned a page, and the scent of age struck her, earth, ash, and something faintly metallic. The script inside was dense and flowing, looping in patterns that seemed almost alive. She had spent her life surrounded by books, yet this one carried a gravity that bent the air. It was as if the words themselves were watching her. Eleanor was no archaeologist, but she had an instinct for the rare, and this was beyond rare. Her eyes traced a repeated sigil that stirred a long-buried memory, a sketch from an article she'd once read about pre-dynastic Egypt, a civilization that supposedly predated the earliest pharaohs by 1,000 years. Scholars dismissed such talk as fantasy, the domain of treasure hunters and dreamers, yet here it was, in her hands, a script that felt older than the Nile itself. The wind rattled the tall windows, a lamp flickered. She thought of the pyramids, their silent, enduring presence against the desert sky, and how much of their true purpose remained locked away. Could this manuscript hold a key? Her fingers trembled as she turned another page. An illustration emerged. A towering structure, not quite the Great Pyramid as we know it, but something older, cruder, crowned with a circle of carved stones. Beneath it, a line of text repeated the same phrase 3 times. She didn't yet know the meaning, but her bones felt it. A warning, or perhaps an invitation. She rose from her chair, clutching the book. The library's walls seemed suddenly too close, too fragile to contain this secret. Whoever had sent it to her, and for whatever reason, had chosen her for a purpose. In the reflection of the darkened window, she caught her own eyes. A quiet woman in a cardigan, hair pinned back, known only for finding misshelved books and reminding students to lower their voices. Yet in that moment, she felt a strange heat in her chest. If this was truly what she thought it might be, the manuscript would not just add a footnote to history, it would rewrite it. Eleanor closed the cover with deliberate care, the sound of leather against leather echoing louder than it should. She whispered to herself, "No one must know. Not yet." What she didn't see was the shadow that passed the glass front doors just as she locked them for the night. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of Eleanor Wren's life. She slid the manuscript into her satchel and stepped into the storm, unaware that the quiet life she'd lived until now had ended the moment she broke that seal. The storm had cleared by morning, but the library still smelled of wet stone when Eleanor arrived. She carried the manuscript pressed against her ribs under her coat, half expecting someone to stop her on the street, demand it back, accuse her of theft. But the city went about its business, oblivious to the treasure she held. At her desk, she drew the curtains just enough to dim the light. Old ink was delicate, too much sunlight could strip it bare. She placed the manuscript on a felt mat, her gloved hands reverent, and began the slow work of magnification. It didn't take long for her to realize this was no ordinary Egyptian script. The symbols danced between recognizable proto-hieroglyphs and an even older form, one she had seen only once before in a single black-and-white plate buried in a 1920s anthropology journal. Those markings had been found carved into stones far south of the Nile Delta and dated, controversially, to nearly 1,000 years before Egypt's first recognized dynasty. Her heart thudded as she traced a particular glyph, a double spiral flanked by two vertical lines. The spiral was a known solar motif, but here it seemed connected to something else, a word repeated in multiple passages. She sketched it out in her notebook, copying every curve. A few lines later, the script took an unexpected turn. The language shifted, fusing into a passage she could half translate using her knowledge of Middle Egyptian. Beneath the first stone lies the breath of Ra. Eleanor's pen paused mid-note. The first stone. Her mind leapt instantly to the Great Pyramid's foundation. But this was older than Khufu's time. Could the text be referring to an earlier structure beneath it? A buried origin the world had forgotten? The idea felt absurd, yet the manuscript pressed against her like a living thing, urging her to believe. She spent hours piecing together phrases, translating by candlelight long after the library closed. The words painted an image, a ceremonial chamber sealed by a single capstone, the breath of Ra hidden within. The passage suggested that this object, whatever it was, had been deliberately entombed to protect it from those who would worship stone but forget the sky. The phrasing gnawed at her. Worship stone, forget the sky. A warning against idolatry? Or perhaps a condemnation of those who misunderstood the pyramid's original purpose. Her tea had long gone cold when she made the discovery that tipped her fully into obsession. In the manuscript's margin, drawn with a hand less steady than the main script, was a crude map. A triangle for the pyramid, a small dot beneath it, and a path curling down like the spiral glyph. It was unmistakable. An instruction to go underground. A thrill ran through her, but it was chased almost immediately by unease. This was no harmless curiosity. If this map was real, and if it truly pointed to something hidden beneath the Great Pyramid, it was the kind of secret that could unseat reputations, dismantle national narratives, even provoke international conflict. Her mind wrestled with the temptation. Was she a librarian, sworn to preserve knowledge, or an explorer standing at the edge of history's greatest vault? Outside, the wind rattled the shutters. Eleanor leaned closer to the page, whispering the translated phrase aloud. Beneath the first stone lies the breath of Ra. She didn't notice the flicker of movement in the street outside, nor the man with the brimmed hat who lingered too long by the lamplight, peering through the cracks in the curtain. Eleanor didn't sleep that night. The phrase looped in her head. Beneath the first stone lies the breath of Ra, until it became almost a chant. By dawn, she had brewed her third pot of tea and surrounded herself with every reference book on Egyptian architecture the library possessed, floor plans, excavation notes, photographs from the 19th century digs. She combed through them all, looking for anything that hinted at a hidden substructure beneath the Great Pyramid. Most accounts agreed. Khufu's pyramid had 3 known chambers, each meticulously documented. But one detail, buried in an old engineer's report, made her sit up straighter. In 1924, a British survey team noted an unusual resonance detected when striking the base stones at the pyramid's northeast corner. The note was dismissed at the time as an anomaly in the limestone, yet the description matched the placement on her crude map almost exactly. Her fingers drummed on the desk. If she could cross-reference this with modern ground-penetrating scans, she might find proof. But official scans were guarded, and she had no clearance to access them. Worse, she didn't have the authority or the money to get to Egypt herself. By late afternoon, her mind was a tangle of possibility and doubt. She needed advice, but from someone who wouldn't laugh her out of the room. The academic world was a tight circle, and she wasn't part of it. She decided on Professor Alistair Gray. A polarizing figure in archaeology, Gray was infamous for challenging orthodox timelines and had paid for it with his reputation. He had once lectured at the local university, and Eleanor had attended out of curiosity. He'd spoken of the pyramids not as tombs, but as machines of stone, built to speak to the sky. Most dismissed him as a crank, but Eleanor remembered the fire in his voice. It took 3 calls to track him down to a cramped office above a dusty bookshop. When she arrived, manuscript tucked under her coat, Gray looked her over with a bemused squint. "You're a librarian," he said flatly. "Yes," she replied, setting the manuscript on his desk. "And this may be the oldest Egyptian text you've ever seen," he chuckled. But the laughter died when he touched the leather. He flipped through the pages with surprising delicacy for a man with such blunt fingers. His lips moved silently, tracing the looping script. Then he froze. "Where did you get this?" His voice was low now, almost wary. "It was delivered to me." No note, no sender. Gray's eyes darted toward the curtained window, then back to her. "Do you know what you have here?" "I have an ancient manuscript." "You have a death warrant," he interrupted. "If the wrong people find out, they won't just take it from you. They'll bury the truth with you." Eleanor's pulse quickened. "So it's real?" "Real enough that I've heard whispers about it for 20 years. The breath of Ra. A relic said to predate the pharaohs, hidden to keep it out of the hands of the first kings. It's more than history. It's leverage." She felt the weight of his words settle in her chest. "I need to know where it leads." Gray leaned back, the chair creaking. "And if we find it, are you ready for what happens next?" Before she could answer, a floorboard groaned in the shop below. Gray's head snapped toward the door. "We're not alone," he murmured. The sound of slow, deliberate footsteps began to climb the stairs. The footsteps were too measured to belong to a customer. No hesitant pause, no creak of searching weight. Whoever was coming knew exactly where they were going. Gray's hand went to the edge of his desk, sliding open a drawer just far enough for Eleanor to glimpse a small revolver nestled among dusty maps. "Stay quiet," he mouthed. The door opened without a knock. A tall man in a charcoal suit stepped inside, his face pale against the brim of his dark felt hat. He didn't look at Eleanor first. His gaze went straight to the manuscript on the desk. "You've been busy, Professor," the man said, his voice low, almost polite. "And making new friends." His eyes flicked toward her, weighing, measuring. Gray didn't move. "This is a private meeting?" The man smiled faintly. "Not anymore." He took a slow step closer, and Eleanor noticed the glint of something metallic beneath his coat. "That book doesn't belong to you. Hand it over, and we can all pretend this never happened." Eleanor's mouth went dry. She felt the urge to speak, to defend her right to the manuscript, but Gray's subtle shake of the head stopped her. "You're making a mistake," Gray said, his tone almost conversational. "Do you have any idea what's written in these pages?" The man's smile didn't change. Enough to know it needs to stay unread. It was the casual certainty in his voice that chilled Eleanor more than the threat itself. This wasn't a thief looking for profit. This was someone protecting a secret. The kind of secret people killed for. Gray reached slowly for the manuscript, sliding it across the desk toward the man. But as the stranger's hand extended, Gray's other hand moved, quick as a whip, grabbing the revolver from the drawer. The man froze, his smile thinning. "Leave," Gray said. "Now." A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the muffled hum of the city outside. Then the stranger gave a single, short nod. "This isn't over." He turned and left, the sound of his footsteps fading down the stairs. Eleanor let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Who was that?" Gray locked the door. "Someone who works for people who've been watching sites like Giza for decades. People who'd rather let the sands keep their secrets." Her fingers itched to grab the manuscript and run, but she stayed rooted to the spot. "So what do we do?" Gray's eyes locked on hers, and for the first time she saw the steel behind the academic's eccentric charm. "We go before they can stop us. Egypt, immediately." The words sent a shiver through her. She had never traveled farther than Paris. The idea of crossing an ocean, of stepping into the desert heat, with men like that one possibly at her heels, should have terrified her. But instead, it lit something in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Still, one question gnawed at her as they began hurriedly packing Gray's notes into a weathered satchel. Why me? Why would someone send this manuscript to a librarian in a small city? Gray hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe because you're invisible." No one suspects a quiet librarian of holding the key to rewriting history. The thought lodged in her mind as they descended the back stairs to avoid the shop. Outside, the sun was setting, staining the sky the color of burnt copper. Somewhere far away, beneath a mountain of ancient stone, a secret waited for them. And Eleanor had just crossed the line from custodian of knowledge to conspirator in a dangerous game. The overnight flight to Cairo was a blur of cramped seats, recycled air, and Eleanor's mind replaying the moment the stranger's eyes locked on the manuscript. She barely spoke, letting Gray handle the logistics. Tickets purchased in cash, connections routed through Athens, baggage kept to a minimum. By the time the plane descended into the heat-hazed city, she felt like she'd stepped out of her own life and into someone else's. Cairo greeted them with chaos, the scent of spice and exhaust, the calls of street vendors, the din of horns tangled in traffic knots. Gray ushered her into a battered taxi, giving the driver an address in rapid Arabic. They drove for nearly an hour, past gleaming hotels and sprawling markets, until the city thinned into low-slung suburbs and finally into the flat, unbroken sweep of desert. Their destination was not a tourist entrance, but a small, walled compound whose gates opened at the sound of Gray's name. Inside, a pair of local men waited, their clothes dusty from the dig site beyond. One of them, a wiry man named Hassan, eyed Eleanor with frank curiosity. "She is the librarian?" Hassan asked in accented English. Eleanor stiffened, but Gray nodded. "She's the reason we're here." Hassan led them into a shaded tent where a table was strewn with site maps, photographs, and core samples of stone. He pointed to one map in particular, an aerial image of the Great Pyramid. A red circle marked the northeast corner, exactly where the crude map in the manuscript had indicated. "This area has never been excavated," Hassan said. "Too close to tourist pathways. Government does not allow disturbance without special permission." Eleanor leaned over the image, tracing the circle with her fingertip. "And if we go beneath it?" Hassan's lips pressed into a thin line. "Then we find what should not be found." Gray slid the manuscript from his satchel, opening to the page with the spiral glyph. Hassan's eyes widened. He muttered something rapid in Arabic to the other man, who crossed himself instinctively. "What does he say?" Eleanor asked. Gray translated. "He says, this symbol is dangerous, that it marks the place where the earth breathes fire." The words sent a prickling down her spine. Fire beneath the pyramid. Breath of Ra. Was it metaphor or something more literal? That night they stayed in the compound, the hot wind rattling the tent flaps like restless fingers. Eleanor couldn't sleep. She sat at the folding table, tracing the map again and again, until she sensed movement outside. Peeking through the canvas slit, she saw two figures by the gate, speaking in low tones. The weak lantern light caught the edge of a charcoal suit and a dark felt hat. Her blood went cold. They'd been followed. She ducked back inside, heart pounding, and woke Gray with a whisper. His eyes narrowed when she described what she'd seen. "They know we're here. We move at first light." Eleanor swallowed hard. "And if they move first?" Gray's answer was simple, grim. "Then we run. Into the pyramid itself. Once we're inside, even they won't follow without permission. Too many eyes." She lay back down, but sleep never came. The desert night was too alive, every sound a possible step, every shadow a threat. And somewhere, beneath that ancient stone mountain, a truth waited for her. One men were willing to kill to keep hidden. The sun rose like a coin dropped into molten glass, bleeding light across the desert. Hassan and his partner were already at the compound gate, their truck idling. Gray shoved the manuscript into his satchel and handed Eleanor a canteen. They drove in silence toward the Giza plateau, keeping to back roads until the silhouette of the Great Pyramid cut sharp against the horizon. The closer they came, the more Eleanor felt the weight of it, an immensity not just of stone, but of centuries. She imagined all the eyes that had stared at it before hers, each certain they knew its purpose. And yet, if the manuscript was right, none of them truly did. At the northeast corner, tourists milled 100 meters away, snapping photos, buying trinkets from pushy vendors. Hassan led them to a rope barrier where two uniformed guards stood. He murmured a few words, palms open in supplication. One guard hesitated, then turned his gaze deliberately toward the vendor stalls, a silent grant of 3 minutes. They slipped under the rope. Hassan crouched, brushing sand from a line of worn limestone blocks. "Here," he said, tapping the ground. The sound rang hollow, just as the British surveyors had noted a century ago. Gray dropped to his knees, pressing his ear to the stone. "There's a cavity beneath." He looked up at Eleanor. "We go now." Hassan's partner produced a small pneumatic drill from his pack, its muted whine lost under the chatter of the crowd. Dust curled into the morning air as they bored into the stone's edge. Beneath, the drill bit suddenly sank, the rock giving way to empty space. A gust of air hissed up, hot and dry, smelling faintly of copper and something older, something that made Eleanor's skin prickle. Hassan widened the hole, then slid a small lamp inside. The light fell on carved steps descending into shadow. Gray grinned like a man seeing salvation. "It's real." They barely had time to secure a rope before a voice barked in Arabic from the direction of the barrier. One of the guards, the one who had looked away, was now gesturing urgently toward them. Eleanor turned to see why, and her stomach dropped. Two men in charcoal suits and dark hats were pushing through the crowd, their movements too purposeful to be tourists. "Inside," Gray ordered. Hassan slung the rope over the edge, and Gray dropped into the darkness without hesitation. Eleanor's pulse roared in her ears as she swung her legs over the opening and lowered herself down, the hot breath of the chamber enveloping her. Her feet hit the first step, stone worn smooth by no recent passage. Hassan and his partner followed, pulling the rope down behind them. The light from above narrowed to a slit, then vanished entirely as the limestone plug was slid back into place. Only the beam of the lamp cut the black. The air was thick, pressing against her skin. The walls closed in, each stone etched faintly with the spiral glyph. They descended in silence, the steps spiraling deeper until the muffled sound of the world above was gone. Finally, the stairway ended at an arched doorway sealed by a single massive slab. Gray touched it reverently. "The first stone," he whispered. Eleanor ran her hand over its surface. It was warm, impossibly warm, as if the sun itself pulsed behind it. Somewhere beyond this barrier lay the breath of Ra, and now there was no going back. The air in the stairwell seemed to tighten as Gray and Hassan studied the slab. Its face was carved with the same double spiral glyph, but here the lines were deeper, almost gouged into the stone, as if the maker wanted to be sure the warning could not be worn away. Hassan ran his fingers along the edges, feeling for seams. "This has not been moved for thousands of years," he murmured. "It is set from the inside." Eleanor crouched, her eyes catching something at the base, a small triangular notch. She reached in and felt a smooth, cold surface, metallic against her fingertips. She drew back sharply. "There's something not stone." Gray leaned down, his lamp flooding the notch with light. "Copper," he said, awe tinging his voice. "An ancient locking pin. Ingenious." It took both Hassan and his partner to work it loose, the metal groaning softly before sliding free. The moment it released, a low, resonant thrum rolled through the chamber, so deep Eleanor felt it in her teeth. The slab shifted by a hair's breadth, exhaling a puff of air so hot and dry it seemed to sear her throat. They heaved together, the stone yielding inch by inch, until a gap opened wide enough to slip through. Grey went first, lamp raised high, his shadow stretching impossibly tall against the far wall. Eleanor followed, ducking beneath the weight of the doorway. The chamber beyond was nothing like the polished corridors tourists saw. Its walls were raw, rough-hewn, the ceiling lost in shadow. In the center, resting on a low stone dais, was an object swathed in layers of brittle linen. The air shimmered faintly around it, as though heat rose from the dais itself. Grey's voice was barely a breath. The breath of Ra. Hassan stepped closer, holding his lamp out. The wrappings were stained in places, dark and flaking. Carefully, he peeled a strip away, revealing a smooth, obsidian-like surface beneath, etched with lines that seemed to writhe when the light struck them. Eleanor felt something stir at the edge of her mind, a pressure that was not sound, but memory, unbidden and strange. She saw flashes. A night sky ablaze with unfamiliar constellations, a city of white stone, voices chanting in a language older than any she knew. She stumbled back, clutching her head. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. Grey's eyes were wide. "It's not just an artifact. It's a transmitter." Before she could ask what he meant, a sound echoed from the stairwell, the faint scrape of shoes on stone. The men in suits had found the opening. Hassan doused his lamp, plunging them into darkness. "We cannot let them take it," he hissed. Eleanor's heart hammered. They were trapped in a sealed chamber with something the world was never meant to see, and men willing to kill for it were steps away. Grey's hand found hers in the dark, pressing something small and cold into her palm. "If they get me," he murmured, "you take this, and you run." Her fingers closed around the copper locking pin. Somewhere above, the footsteps grew louder. The footsteps stopped just beyond the slab. In the absolute dark, Eleanor could hear the faint rasp of fabric, the click of metal, guns being readied. A voice, low and deliberate, cut through the silence. "Professor Grey, hand it over." Grey didn't answer. The heat in the chamber pulsed against Eleanor's skin, as if the artifact itself were aware of the intrusion. Hassan shifted beside her, the whisper of his breath fast and shallow. The slab scraped against the floor, forced open from the other side. A blade of light sliced into the chamber, framing two figures in charcoal suits. One stepped inside, his gun leveled. "What you've found," he said, "will never see daylight." Eleanor's mind raced. They couldn't overpower them, not here, but they could outthink them. She glanced at the artifact, remembering the strange visions it had shown her. If it was truly some kind of transmitter, perhaps... She stepped forward. "You don't even know what it is," she said, her voice steady. The man's eyes flicked toward her, gun still trained on Grey. "Enlighten me." She didn't. Instead, she reached for the copper pin in her palm and drove it into the notch at the base of the dais. The reaction was instant. The obsidian surface flared with golden light, and a deep hum filled the chamber. The air thickened, vibrating in their bones. The men staggered back, clutching their heads. Eleanor's vision fractured, the same sky of strange constellations, but now she stood on a high platform, looking down at thousands gathered below, their faces lifted in reverence. The hum grew sharper, almost a roar. When Eleanor blinked, She was back in the chamber. The artifact's glow faded, leaving the suits dazed and disoriented. Hassan moved first, shoving one man back through the slab and slamming it shut. The locking pin clattered into Eleanor's hand again. She jammed it into place, sealing the chamber. No one spoke for a long moment. The air was cooling now, the oppressive heat lifting. Gray broke the silence. "You've just done what most archaeologists dream of and fear in equal measure. You've awakened something older than the pharaohs, and you've kept it from those who'd bury it." They didn't linger. With Hassan leading, they retraced their steps up the spiral stair, emerging into the blinding desert light. The suits were gone. For now. Weeks later, back in her library, Eleanor sat at her desk. The manuscript was gone, entrusted to Gray for safekeeping in a place neither of them would disclose. But in her top drawer, wrapped in plain cloth, lay the copper locking pin. A reminder. The discovery made headlines in cautious, sanitized terms. Unexplored cavity beneath Giza pyramid, with no mention of the breath of Ra. Gray kept his promise to protect the truth until the world was ready. For Eleanor, the experience had shifted something permanent. She moved among her books with the quiet knowledge that history was not fixed ink on a page, but a living thing, and that sometimes the least likely person is chosen to guard its most dangerous truths. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.